Good afternoon. Thank you for joining NVTC for our Masters of Leadership in Tech series. Please welcome NVTC Chairman and the founder and CEO of Attain Partners, Greg Baroni.
Well, thank you, Taryn, and good afternoon. I'm so delighted to welcome you to today's Masters of Leadership event featuring Jon Lin of Equinix. I hope you enjoyed networking in the social lounge before this program started, and I hope to see you there after the program as well. As one of the nation's largest technology councils, NVTC continues to shape the prominence of our national capital region as a leading tech hub. NVTC serves companies from all sectors of the tech industry, from small businesses and startups to Fortune 100 tech companies, as well as service providers, academic institutions, and nonprofit organizations. As we've shared with you previously, NVTC's mission is to accelerate technology innovation and promote world-class technology workforce development to create a very thriving technology ecosystem in our region. Today, the Masters of Leadership in Tech series is made possible by our sponsors. Our platinum sponsor, Attain Partners, the Loudoun County Department of Economic Development, our PR and marketing advisor, the Merit Group, and our media partner, iHeartMedia. Thank you for your support, and a special thank you as well to our business and academic partners whose support enables us to provide content and programming all year long, the list of which you can now see on the screen. Thank you to Booz Allen Hamilton, the Consumer Technology Association, Deltec, Dominion Energy, Fairfax County Economic Development Authority, George Mason University, Innova, KPMG, Maximus, Microsoft, Noblesse, Northrop Grumman, Old Dominion University, PenFed Credit Union, Pillsbury, SEIC, Venable, Verizon, Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation, Virginia Tech, NVTC Policy Advisor, Hunton Andrews Kurth, and our marketing agency advisor, O2KL. Thank you all for your support. Now it's my privilege and honor to introduce today's distinguished speaker and moderator. First, our speaker. Jon Lin serves as the Executive Vice President and General Manager, Data Center Services for Equinix. In this role, Jon ensures the growth and continued innovation of the company's market-leading interconnected co-location business. He has global responsibility for Equinix physical data center services and software engineering teams. Jon has been with Equinix for more than 13 years, serving in senior leadership roles across strategy, product engineering, sales engineering, and professional services. Jon is a passionate ally for diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and is the executive sponsor for Equinix Asian and Veterans Employee Connection Networks, as well as the company's work with the Asian American Foundation. Oh, and by the way, word on the street is that Jon is also an avid and impressive snowboarder, so we look forward to his insights on the upcoming Winter Olympics. Our moderator today is Joe Weinman, a longtime industry executive and the author of Cloudonomics and Digital Disciplines. Most recently, Joe was a senior vice president at Telex, now Digital Reality. Earlier in his career, he held executive positions at Bell Labs, AT&T, and HP. Joe serves on several advisory boards and impressively has been awarded 27 patents and is a global keynoter and digital strategist who has spoken at over 400 events. Please join me in welcoming our guests, Jon Lin and Joe Weinman.
Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Greg. So, Jon, before we get started, I have like a hard-hitting question, since I'm sort of in training for doing a 60 Minutes interviews, which is it Equinix or Equinix?
It's Equinix. When the company was founded, the name really came about from three words. It was equality, neutrality, and internet exchange. So the EQ is for Equa.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're done here, Greg. So maybe I'm sure there are people in the audience that know Equinix and Digital Realty and many other companies in the space inside out. But for those that don't, can you just give a little bit of background on what role Equinix plays in today's digital world?
Yeah, absolutely. You think about Equinix as the world's digital infrastructure company. We're helping people and companies connect everywhere around the world, operating to over 230 data centers in 60 plus markets on 5 continents. And what that means is, like, if you're accessing Uber, if you're like watching a Netflix video, all of that traffic and all of that data needs to actually reside somewhere, right? The cloud ends up needing to be a physical location, and all of that traffic needs to connect with each other. And that's what Equinix really does. We allow our customers to interconnect with each other and exchange that traffic incredibly efficiently everywhere around the world.
So maybe this is oversimplifying, but would it be safe to say that we couldn't be doing the session that we're doing right now if it weren't for Equinix?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been incredible to watch all of the traffic explosion over the course of the last 2 years. Certainly, the pandemic, as well as just digital transformation at large, really has seen traffic levels spike around the world. So it's been I'd say it's been an incredible journey.
All right. So speaking of incredible journeys, you were in the role of President of the Americas, and then, because I guess you had some free time on your hands, you added the role of EVP of Data Center Services. So as EVP and GM of Data Center Services, what does that really mean? So people in the audience know, like, your background. And then also, given that you're sort of doing both jobs, maybe what was your old role? What will your next role? Just blend it all together for us.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah, so I was previously the president of the Americas, or still currently wearing that seat while we find my backfill there. And it's I think juggling those two jobs and trying to make sure that you're making that transition, doing it thoughtfully, and kind of continuing to learn and kind of listen about what the new opportunity, new role, and kind of new teams are while you're kind of juggling and managing through and making sure that the lights keep running and the business keeps flowing on the day job it's been challenging right now. Candidly, it's a lot of extra work, a lot of extra time, but hopefully over the next couple of weeks / month ahead, we'll be able to find that. But in my role as EVP of the Data Center Services, it's really about understanding and building and evolving our capabilities globally, right? And I think in the role of President of the Americas, I ran strategy, go-to-market, and kind of planning and capital planning for the Americas theater, so North and South America, looked over some acquisitions and integrations. So obviously just continuing to build data centers and engage with customers to make sure that they're getting what they need. And I'm really excited about the opportunity to help continue to drive that now on a global basis.
When you say acquisitions, when I think of acquisitions, I think maybe I'll buy that shirt once it goes on sale. But when you say acquisitions, you would include, say, the $1 billion acquisition of Bell Canada data centers?
Absolutely, yeah. That one, it's and previously, I mean, I've been with Equinix almost 13 years now, and we did the Verizon acquisition. We acquired 29 data centers from Verizon for about I think $3.6 billion. Acquired the Infomart down in Texas, and acquired locations as well in Brazil and Mexico and all around the world.
So I think there's some line to the effect of $1 billion here, $1 billion there. Pretty soon we're talking real money, right? So
no, that's right.
So in terms of your personal involvement, since this is the Masters of Leadership series, first of all, how do you think about leadership generally? And then how do you think about you yourself in terms of, critical learning, success factors, the nature of the industry, and so forth?
Yeah, I think the most important part about leadership to me is the notion around servant leadership, right? Like my job is really focusing on helping the team get to the goals that the company needs out of all of our teams. And so the first step around that is making sure we understand what priorities there are, and being very clear about what we need to deliver in the near term, in the intermediate term, in the long term, and then aligning and communicating across the organization. Hey, this is what we're doing. These are the goalposts that we're going after. Here's the milestones. And then my job is, empowering the team and getting out of the way, right? Really just making sure I can knock down obstacles as they run into them, and encouraging encouraging them, coaching them when needed, but otherwise just making sure that they have all the tools they need to get the job done.
So I'm going to press you on that a little bit, because this is a debate that I've had with other people too, which is kind of, my model, at least early in my career, and maybe, back in the day, of what leadership was really about someone, like Napoleon comes to mind. Okay, although maybe that didn't end so well, but at least for a while, it's kind of, you come up with some innovative new strategy. You see what nobody else can see, you bring the naysayers around, and then you kind of move toward that. And now, of course, the notions of empowerment and servant leadership, are more popular. But I guess I have to confess, I don't really understand the balance. Okay. And so, it seems like, if you want, I could take the job of President of the Americas tomorrow and just let my team be fully empowered, because I wouldn't know what I was doing. And you don't strike me as someone who doesn't know what they're doing. So can you say more about kind of that balance between sort of direction and, and the ability to view what the future holds, and at the same time, obviously you've got to motivate and empower your team?
Yeah, I think one of the areas, as you say that, the biggest one to me is just the way to drive scale is through talent development, right? At the end of the day, I realized this, not as early in my career as I probably should have, but, I would say, Joe, I was one of those guys for, probably the first 2/3 of my career was, I could come up with the right answer, right? And I knew how to get there, and I could synthesize the information, understand that. And then I would just kind of advocate for that, right? Instead of, really taking more time to inquire around, hey, what are other people's perspectives around that? How can we make sure we've got all of the cross-functional stakeholders aligned around that? And then bringing them together on the journey towards getting to, either the answer I had already thought of, or, getting around, hey, how can we really drive to the best outcome around that? And that's, again, that's been the most amazing part of the last, I'd say 8 years at Equinix, which getting that coaching and understanding the unlock that you can do, then not just for myself, but also just for all of the teams. It's just so much more invigorating, so much more exciting. And you end up with a better output, right? Getting diversity of thought into the solution that you're going to make. And I say this all the time now, it's all of us is smarter than any of us, right? So being able to incorporate that together, but also, as you can imagine, part of my job is cutting through some of the noise, right? And helping those teams assess and guide that together. And then again, just driving towards alignment. And then there's definitely a, disagree but commit aspect of that, right? Which is, hey, sometimes your answer may not be the one that was in there, but once we've all decided together and we've kind of had vigorous discussion and debate about that, let's all make sure we're aligned around that, and when we're just committing to execute against that play.
So I'm not going to ask you personally necessarily about any failures on the off chance that you may have had one a long time ago. But let's just say, for people that you have known in your career, and or even your neighbor or friends, cousins, nephews, mailman, what is the biggest mistake that you see leaders making today, where you're like, oh, did he or she really just do that? No. And, maybe what are some recurring patterns? Where do you think there's opportunity for growth in today's leaders that are, perhaps somewhere in your organization?
Yeah, and I think people are coming around on this a bit, but failure is not a bad thing, right? I think that's one area where, if you're kind of punishing your teams or scolding folks around failure, it's well, you have to try in order to start enabling. And the most important part is, did you learn lessons from that? Are you able to go ahead and take those lessons and apply those going forward? I think, we should all be stretching, right? And I think if you haven't failed to some degree, you're not trying hard enough, you're not pushing hard enough around those efforts. So it's definitely the idea of, fail fast around that, learn from it, listen to it, understand that, and then, digest that, and then make sure you're educating the rest of the team too, right? I think one of the things that I've seen is people that do have challenges or fail, you kind of hide that, you don't talk about that. We all are used to celebrating the wins, celebrating all of the triumphs. It's important to say hey, this screwed up, but this is what we learned off of that, and everybody should get that and internalize that and make that part of the knowledge base going forward.
So This reminds me of, sorry to interject a joke, but it's one of the first things I heard early in my career is it's attributed to IBM. I don't know if it is or not, but it was an executive at IBM that had made an error and lost the company, $10 million, which was a lot of money back then, and offered his resignation. And his boss said, "You can't quit now. We just spent $10 million on your education." So that's exactly along the lines of what you're saying. All right, so to move maybe a little bit to sort of the role of Equinix in all this for a little while, the topic for today is how physical infrastructure will help create our digital future. And it's not even our digital future because the future is already here and has been for a few years. But most people, and I always think of my teenage daughter or my mom when I think about most people understanding how the world works. Most people don't necessarily see or think about what happens, while they're clicking away or their browser doesn't work. They maybe go as far as there's something wrong with Wi-Fi. But how exactly does Equinix enable all of the things that we take for granted nowadays, whether it's social media or video conferencing or connected autonomous vehicles or what have you?
Yeah, it's, I would say first and foremost, you hear about the word cloud all the time, obviously. And I mean, you wrote a whole book about it. It's that word itself is such a misnomer for what's actually happening, right? Like at the end of the day, it's servers. Servers need to live somewhere. They need to actually be physically located somewhere. They need power. They need to be secured. They need to be able to connect to each other. And then they need to be able to connect to the end user, right? The people that are actually accessing that. And so what Equinix does, when you think about infrastructure at large, infrastructure isn't as sexy as a word as I think it should be in a lot of ways, right? You think about roads, you think about, power plants, you think about utilities. Well, like the world can't exist without that. And the same thing on digital infrastructure, all of the things that we're doing, like this session today, again, like browsing the web, like, buying stuff online, all of that exists because there's computers somewhere, there's networks somewhere, and those things need to be connected. And, over the course of the last 10 plus years, you've seen those requirements just drastically explode. The ability to use data in new ways for consumers, for enterprises, for businesses, whether it's smart manufacturing, whether it's, IoT, like you mentioned, whether it's like, now autonomous vehicles, all of that creates more data that needs to be processed. And so, the notion of, well, infrastructure is foundational to that. You've got to make sure you've got capacity to be able to do that, just like you need it for any other infrastructure across the country. And Equinix plays a huge part in that by both constructing the facilities and also bringing those customers and ecosystems together, whether that's the carriers, the cloud providers, healthcare providers, et cetera, that can use that data. And so, like telehealth, for instance, obviously exploded over the course of the last 2 years. Well, telehealth is a video session. That's passing bits. That's, providing high-res traffic to a doctor, being able to see that. And that's doing it with a low latency connection so that you can have a live, warm interaction instead of, something that's overly clinical. And that's just an example of, it's foundational to everything we're doing as a society now.
So again, not knowing exactly the breakdown of the audience as to, who's like in this industry and has been for longer than either of us versus, who's just kind of walking in off the street. I just want to go into sort of the thing that most people probably think of when they're trying to figure out, like, how could this work? Like imagining what happens behind the scenes after, it's like a Matrix style, the bits travel along a wire and get somewhere. So, I have my home Wi-Fi set up, and I have my ISP that I link to. Why isn't that enough for like making things like what we're doing right now happen?
No, that's right. I mean, the internet is a network of networks, right? So your ISP has connections to all of its subscribers. How does that ISP then connect to the rest of the networks in the world, or to Google, or to, AirMeet? And that's what Equinix does fundamentally. We're the location where all of these networks converge together, and all of these cloud providers and service providers can put their infrastructure so that you can go ahead and then seamlessly connect to all of it.
Got it. Well, that all makes sense for sure. And one of the things that it's not really the focus of this, but I think it's still very relevant, is Equinix for the past few years has done a global interconnection index, which is sort of an industry-wide study looking at what's going on with what you call interconnection bandwidth. And I don't know if this is still the case as of today, but one of the biggest learnings perhaps was that internet traffic growth is increasing greatly, on the 20-something% level. But interconnection bandwidth, which is sort of the degree of the way that all these different neurons are interconnecting and the source of intelligence and functionality, is increasing at almost double that. So it seems as though, especially as we get to more and more connected devices, that Equinix, by definition, is playing a more and more critically important role. Is that the case?
No, I think that's definitely true. I think that explosion of data means that it needs to be used somewhere, right? Like data created and collected but not used in any way is kind of useless. And I think again, companies are realizing that. And so what they're doing is they're collecting these massive reams of data, and they need to figure out how to process that. They need to know how to share that. They need to know how to drive value out of that. And that's, again, driving a huge explosion in that connectivity between companies. It's not just, a company connecting directly to a cloud provider to exchange traffic for their own business. It's also, hey, how can I connect to the rest of my supply chain now? How can we exchange data so that we can manufacture more effectively, we can ship more effectively? And so that private interconnection of traffic is just taking off like in leaps and bounds.
So, to make that happen, I know that very often, and you wake up in the morning and you're like, you find an extra $1 billion or $3 billion in your wallet, and you go buy an entire company or a megalith of a company's entire suite of data centers. But now, most recently, we have the infrastructure bill with hundreds of billions of dollars, depending on how you count it, by which segment, available for investment. So, what does that mean to Equinix? What does it mean to Northern Virginia? What does it mean to the Americas, to the industry at large? How does that play into your plans?
Yeah, it's exciting to see, policy finally kind of catching up with the need that exists out there, right? In the amount of infrastructure that the country needs, both in terms of broadband and being able to connect our communities and make sure everybody has access to, high-speed bandwidth, because that's almost a base requirement now to really progress in society. And so I think there's an important element around kind of equity and fair outcomes that's part of that. But it's not just about that network traffic, like I said, right? It's the networks being there and being able to get broadband is foundational to, hey, how can I actually have applications that are closer then, so that I can get the performance that I need for my business or my community? How can I go ahead and again have operations like telehealth? How can I make sure my remote school operation works well and making sure that that traffic is processed locally? It's something that we've seen really explode and take off, and it's going to be here to stay, right? I think all of these lessons that we've learned over the pandemic, it's changed the way we'll work fundamentally. I think the idea of always going back to the office and doing 9 to 5 there is probably that shift we're seeing across the globe, really being like, okay, well, we've seen that this works now. We've been operating in this mode for 2 years. That hybrid mode of working is going to be here to stay. Well, that creates a lot of different strains on our infrastructure, both for enterprises and what they need to do in terms of having connectivity, but also for just consumer networks at home. Like all of this video traffic that's going on, like a session like this, 3 or 4 years ago, we'd all be live in a room somewhere watching this instead. So,
yeah. So obviously, the pandemic has changed a lot of things in that way, including telemedicine or telehealth, and the explosion of video conferencing. So I'm sensing that things are not quite over yet with the pandemic, but I'm hoping another 5 to 10 years we'll be done with assorted variants and figure something out. But what have you seen? You work with a lot of customers, obviously, and key strategic customers. So what have you seen, in the last couple of years as far as, transformation, acceleration of digital transformation, unique solutions that, have been jury-rigged?
No, it's a really exciting one. I think we published the Global Tech Trends Survey last year and found, the pandemic fundamentally fast-tracked a lot of the transformation that enterprises were already thinking about digital infrastructure and how to do that. And so, I think we saw something like 47% of IT decision makers said they accelerated transformation plans just because of the pandemic, and a majority of those were just said it wasn't just about accelerating, but it really had to force them to revisit and revise exactly what they were doing on their IT strategy. And what does that translate into? That translates into what we've seen is companies that have succeeded and in some cases even thrived through the pandemic were the ones that had digital infrastructure that was kind of native towards how digital leaders behave. They're using multiple cloud providers. They're accessing multiple SaaS providers. They're thinking about how to use their data and be able to monetize that and share that with their partners. And that's just accelerating. Again, I think that's an enduring trend. So I don't think of it as a pull forward so much as the entire industry is moving that way. There's more and more newcomers coming into the market. You look at the explosion in new SaaS providers and kind of the unicorns that are developing in terms of providing those new very, very targeted features for particular enterprises. That's just going to continue, right? The pace of innovation continues to accelerate there, and that's I think we're no longer in the very earliest innings of how we can use data, but we're not anywhere close to being able to capture all of that full value, right? And that's both for companies and then also for our communities, like the way that we can go ahead and use data around smart cities and having more intelligent distribution of power inside, like better metering of water. I think all of that's key. And I think it brings up a huge area for us and our passion around sustainability, right? Because we've been kind of at the forefront of science-based targets and making sure that as a data center industry at large, we're a vocal partner with even other data center providers saying hey, how can we be at the forefront of this? Because the impact to the globe is great, right? And I think it's the impact that we can drive on that is tremendous. And I think that modernization of infrastructure that hopefully we can use these the federal support and policy around is going to be a key to that.
Yeah, so all these different topics are interrelated between sustainability and federal funding and sort of architectural directions. But if I could just stick a little bit longer with pandemic-related impacts, maybe not so much to your customers, but as far as Equinix's resources are concerned, both data centers and then also partner networks. One of the things that was pretty clear that happened in just a few days is, everything was fine. And there was this, news out of China that was vaguely interesting. And then all of a sudden people realized that viruses actually undergo transmission between people, and we've got jet travel. And so it was here in a nanosecond, right? And so all of the last 30 years, let's say, of investment in corporate enterprise networks and MPLS and, SD-WAN, anything that companies did, it all became sort of irrelevant overnight because suddenly everyone had to work from home. And now what was important was, everything from remote security to, do you have even the basic bandwidth and reliability and availability of your ISP connection to be able to join something like this? So the obvious question, both for Equinix and also network service providers, is, what did that mean? Especially, mobile video went from kids watching TikTok or YouTube videos to all of a sudden people needing to dial in to, make $1 billion acquisition, on a mobile phone. So, how did we perform? Were we set up for that? Are there any lessons besides just continued investment in infrastructure, to prepare us for the next major disruption?
Yeah, I'd say we were fortunate in a lot of ways through the early stages of the pandemic that, the industry at large had started already transforming and upping kind of their capacity, right? That move from 10 gig to 40 gig to 100 gig was already well underway. And that created kind of a bit of slack capacity to be able to deploy into. At the same time, that's continued to explode, right? And I think, everybody was scrambling in the first 2 to 3 months to try and keep up with the explosion in traffic. And like you said, it went from being kind of unidirectional of, consuming video, consuming content, to being fully bidirectional so fast that, a lot of carriers in particular, especially on the consumer networks, they had to adjust how they were set up to exchange that internet traffic, how they were set up to connect directly to a Zoom or, a WebEx or Google Classrooms, and be able to actually do more of that private interconnection. Because at the end of the day, that private interconnection we talk about is a dedicated dedicated link that's completely private and much more scalable than internet, which is more best effort, and you can run into congestion and all of those issues that we still do see sometimes at night.
So speaking about that shift, then without maybe naming names, unless you want to, you must have some customers where you're like, oh, wow, that's incredible what they're doing. That's brilliant. And others who are like, I don't know, we keep trying to explain to them what's going on. They don't quite get it. And I'm obviously over dramatizing this a little bit, but what would you say, either with concrete examples if you want, or just sort of insights generally, what are customers doing today? What should they be doing today and tomorrow? What are they doing that's completely wrong or maybe a little bit questionable? And, I guess without ruining any existing customer relationships, although you don't care as much anymore because you're not fully responsible for sales. So you can go ahead and jeopardize for the sake of this strategic direction conversation.
No, I think there's a couple of different directions I would take on that. The first is, the companies that did well had a really good understanding of the underlying infrastructure, right? And understanding how networks work, how to be able to connect to multiple different networks, and how to connect directly to different either, again, suppliers or cloud providers. What we've seen in kind of the developer community at large that's driving so much of the need for compute and the need for growth is they don't actually understand infrastructure particularly well, right? They understand software incredibly well, and sophistication with such a degree of sophistication and understanding how to scale based off of firing up additional nodes. But a lot of the time that's not the right answer, right? Like smart networking can actually help reduce the need for more servers and help contain some of that spend. And so that's a big area for us of just educating the community. And, we actually did an acquisition about 2 years ago now of a company called Packet that was really focused around the developer community and giving like bare metal servers via software APIs. And we think about that as the journey for Equinix at large is how can we make, consuming this physical infrastructure be able to be done at software speed, be able to be done via API, like, through a Terraform push, et cetera, and just be able to scale much more rapidly and be more responsive to the needs of developers as that kind of community just continues to grow and swell. So I think that's the biggest one. You see a lot of these like SaaS unicorns that are coming out, and they're entirely built on one cloud provider or another with, kind of call it 9-figure cloud spend. And you're like, well, you can optimize that, right? Like you can actually understand what the underlying infrastructure is there. And we've been really successful engaging them and saying like, okay, well, here's how you can reduce your transit costs. Here's how you can reduce all of your networking costs by actually using interconnection in a much more differentiated way.
Yeah, but it sounds like you're talking about more than simply smart interconnection, because with bare metal API, it sounds like what you're really talking about is an extremely fungible, flexible compute fabric that is globally networked and presumably secure, that then customers can have at their disposal to do what they want. So it's like Play-Doh for adults, for developers, right? So is that kind of the vision of where Equinix goes, sort of, partner in the ecosystem, but also create this intelligent, flexible infrastructure?
That's right, especially, both in terms of the flexibility on location, again, with, 67 metros now, I think across 5 continents, like being able to get to locations that they previously couldn't and being able to scale rapidly on that infrastructure. I would say, I'm obviously a huge believer in colocation, but colocation's tough, right? Like you've got to buy servers, you have to have them installed, you have to have them rack and stacked, and and especially internationally, like you have to have them shipped. And over the course of the last year and a half now, through the supply chain issues for servers, for networking gear, for all of that complexity, it's getting harder and harder for customers right now to be able to actually even get that infrastructure. So especially because we've got scale around that, we've got buying power, we've got deployment that's already happening in constant motion, it creates a kind of an easy button for them to be able to get up and running.
Yeah, I mean, just you reminded me of the issues with supply chain, right? Where I think it was yesterday, something came out about Ford was going to stop production on something or stop taking reservations for orders because they don't have the capacity. There's not enough chips. So, and Intel building a huge plant in Ohio, and lots of news around that, because again, people just take this stuff for granted, right? They're just like, it all works, and Wi-Fi is at the bottom of Maslow's new hierarchy of needs. So but people don't realize that it's all about, you've got to have cables and microwave towers and subsea and chips and servers and everything else to make it work.
No, that's right. Chips and servers and generators and just electrical wiring, and it's I think that the supply chain disruptions feel pretty significant out there. And again, we've been able to plan ahead, be able to, again, the scale of our organization, especially globally, gives us the ability to get ahead of that on behalf of all of our customers.
Well, that sounds great. So we have a lot of things going on in terms of the next wave of technology, and obviously edge computing is critical. Not that cloud computing goes away, but edge provides a nice complement, and anything up and down the layers that we would call the fog. We've got GPUs and AI at the edge with neuromorphic chips. We've got 5G rollouts kind of in some unknown state that is sort of happening in various places, both standalone and non-standalone. And so, then all the different variations of that, right? So we've got an explosion in IoT devices. People talk about tens of billions. I've done calculations that show that it's pretty easy to get to 1 trillion, because if you assume there's 8 billion people in the world, I personally have probably 100 smart devices in my house, like 10 Nest Cams, a dozen smart outlets, smart light bulbs, smart TVs, smart everything except for me. Basically, everything in the house is smart except for me. And so you've got this explosion of devices with a need for edge processing. What is that? We already talked about it increases the rate of growth of interconnection bandwidth as all these things need to connect up in different ways. But what does it do to Equinix's focus or business model or strategy, at least that you're willing to share, as opposed to any top secret maneuvers that you have planned?
Yeah, no, it's something we're tracking a ton, right? Obviously, we try and stay customer led around that, customer focused on, hey, how can we solve some of these challenges? I'd say the first step is being in the markets that matter for them, right? And making sure we've got that coverage. I think we're continuing to expand around the globe. You saw our recent acquisition of an asset in Africa, Main One, which is just an incredible story. Hopefully you guys get a chance to read it. Just the leadership there, the story and journey is just amazing. But it's, I think, being where that traffic is going and where you're starting to see the end user develop is incredibly important. I think we've got coverage about 90% of the population of the world within, call it, a 10 millisecond radius of delivery, which really empowers a ton of applications, right? And that's how we think about our location strategy. It's not about, hey, where can we get power cheapest? It's not about, where can we go ahead and get cheap land? It's, hey, how can we be where the end users are, where the eyeballs are, where the companies are that are actually generating that value? And that edge keeps kind of moving, right? I think it starts with being in more markets in the US, and we're spending a lot of time talking with our customers about, well, what about like the really, really far edge? What about being at every tower and all of that? I just say it feels early days for that. We're listening and we're spending a lot of time with cloud providers, the carriers themselves, looking for opportunities to provide value. I think it's just we're still waiting for more robust customer demand before we kind of move in that direction, though.
Got it. Yeah. And so one interesting thing is that let me exclude the last 2 years, but for the past several hundred years, there's been a giant move out of rural and suburban areas into cities with, I think it was a decade or so ago that it crossed over where more than 50% of people lived in the city. And then that sort of reversed a little bit, as people started coming out to the suburbs to get away from, pandemic involved issues. And then now it looks like that's sort of the reversal is reversing. So, people are moving back into the cities. And so, what do you see that doing? I mean, you're saying 90% of the world's population is within 10 milliseconds of a data center. Do you, anticipate getting even closer, or is 10 milliseconds enough for all the applications that you would want?
I think we're watching it carefully. I'd say for today and for the kind of the near future, we think that that's sufficient. And again, we're constantly talking to our customers about that. I think the challenge on having kind of a broad application set that needs even kind of tighter latency requirements is it's a bit of a chicken and an egg, right? Because it doesn't really, like, that capability just doesn't exist today. And so it's really hard for software developers or engineers to kind of build to that capability and requirement, because like, well, you can't really use that anywhere right now. So I think that's what we're kind of seeing. It's we'll see again and track that carefully. I think it's pretty interesting to see some of the private 5G developments that you were alluding to around, like, hey, what does that mean for the factory floor? How can you actually do much kind of smaller deployments then and make sure that you're harnessing that data when you need like 1 millisecond latency requirements? Because, you know, as you've probably seen on like how it's made and stuff, the stuff on the factory floor moves incredibly fast, and the imaging and kind of processing that needs to happen is so fast. But it's pretty exciting to again continue to track there, and again we're just it's so cool to like just go to companies' headquarters and see what they're doing and say like, okay, well, how can we help, right? And just be focused around, all right, well, what parts are you struggling with? How can we go ahead and help you change and figure out how to digitize that?
Yeah, everything on the factory floor seems to move extremely quickly unless it's something that I've ordered personally. So I'm not sure what that syndrome is exactly. So, you know, the dark side of this, more data centers in more places, more networking, more interconnection bandwidth, more internet traffic, more 5G, et cetera, is sort of energy use. And it's probably no surprise that sustainability is a key issue. You alluded to it, briefly earlier, but I'm sure that Equinix has a lot going on in that area, whether it's data center PUE or net zero. What can you just talk a little bit about maybe the major initiatives and how you see it all balancing out?
Yeah, it's a huge focus area for us, and it has been for almost 10 years now. And I'd say we were the first data center provider to come out with a pledge that said we want to be on 100% renewables. We've launched our science-based targets over the course of the last year, and really what we call our future first commitment strategy towards sustainability. And we've got 90% renewable coverage globally for all of our data center energy consumption. So we've made incredible progress against that, and we're going to continue to do more. We're continuing to invest heavily with that. We're using, green bond structures that force us in a lot of ways, using that capital to actually create a more sustainable data center with more efficiency. And we're working with the entire community around that, right? Really like co-authoring and signing the Climate Neutral Data Center Operator Pact in Europe, and making sure we get all together around that, because this is important, like I said, for the world. And I'd say it's also important for our people, right? It's incredible to see the impact that makes on our people, and how excited they are that we're not just like doing this and building an awesome business that's doing it. It's like, well, we really care about what our impact could be on the world, and we want to do this in a responsible way. And I think when you talk to employees, and you talk to especially kind of new to career and like the millennials that are coming into our workforce that are providing so much like power and energy and value, like, purpose matters, right? And like knowing that the company is kind of doing the right thing is something that is a huge differentiator for us.
Yeah, I don't know if you saw this, but McKinsey just a few days ago actually came out with a report on kind of, on the Great Resignation, but it goes back to what you're saying, which is sort of the question is, why do people leave their jobs? And, the neoclassic, economist view would be, well, they just go, if there's more money rationally once you adjust for, the cost of commuting and things like that. But the biggest reason they leave is toxic culture. And, the flip side of that, of course, is that the biggest reason maybe that they go to where they're going has to do with it being a purpose-driven organization that, could include saving the whales, or obviously sustainability, or saving the oceans, or what have you. So that sustainability angle is very important. Now, that said, is sustainability enough in the sense that the industry as a whole is facing a shortage of 300,000 jobs, and presumably, and everything from the mail delivery person at headquarters to the CEO. And so, what do you do about that? What is Equinix doing about that? What can anyone do about that? What are you personally doing about that?
Yeah, I'd say the first is, events like this, right? And I think just getting the word out there, because a lot of people, they're not aware of what the data center industry is, or the role that we play in our society. And so when you start introducing folks to that, whether that's through our intern program, our engagement with local community colleges, and just getting people involved and seeing it, they get really fired up about it, right? Because at the end of the day, the work that Equinix does is fundamentally powering the digital economy, right? And the work that we do matters, right? If we went offline, the internet would go down. It would we'd be
Don't do that. Please don't do that.
So it's we're really a very, very kind of mission oriented, purpose driven culture. It's like, hey, we're also empowering everything that we do that's fun, right? Like TikTok and like YouTube and Twitter and everything else that happens on the internet, and like that's really cool for folks to be able to see. And I think we're also incredibly focused on just the diversity of talent we can bring in as we're thinking about that new to career. It's like, hey, how can we start educating? How can we just create opportunities there? And that's multiple different paths. I think the speaker mentioned I'm a member of our exec sponsor for our Veterans Connection group, and like that's an area for us that's an alternate pathway, right, where we're really actively engaged with both military and military spouses programs. Say like, hey, you guys, there are few individuals that are more mission oriented than that, and being able to bring them into our culture and just train them from scratch and like be that first job out of the military for them and be operating our data centers and be part of that is just a great opportunity.
So, besides that, in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or diversity, inclusion, and belonging, or whatever term you want to use, you're personally involved in things, and what programs are there, or what are you doing about the skills shortage broadly, bringing millennials on board, bringing older people such as myself on board? Like, how does Equinix, do you have any trouble hiring? Are you good, or are you subject to kind of maybe a little bit attenuated, but the issues that are facing everybody, across the spectrum these days?
No, I think the talent acquisition is the hard for everybody around the world right now, right? And I think it's certainly a focus area for us. Well, one of the things that I think makes us really appealing is the culture of the company, right? We're very intentional about how we've developed that over time, the way we engage with each other. It's about being casual and authentic and wanting to win, but making sure we're supporting each other. And so we've really, when you kind of interview and you see that, and you kind of like watch our videos and the way we show up, it's every day, right? And it's I'd say I was talking with some of the rest of the leadership team yesterday about like I don't have any really boundaries between like work and life, right? Like the ability to bring my whole self in every day and celebrate that, and just like just be, this is my family, right? This is where I spend all my time. This is where like I love everybody that I work with. We have an incredible time. We're laughing, we're joking, but we're getting shit done. It's incredibly important, right? And I think that's what people like focus around. That's what empowers people. That's what excites people as a work environment.
Yes, purpose and mission, and the social aspect. That sounds great. So a little bit more on diversity. People use it to mean many different things, right? Whether it's different ages, different genders, different races, different ethics, different religions. But one thing is cognitive diversity, and one of the things that I thought was fascinating about you personally is that your undergraduate work was in biology and computer science, which is not something that you see every day. And I'm just curious, I have a daughter that is a teen. She'll be headed off to college, hopefully in a few years. What are your recommendations to, this all fills under both diversity and filling the skills gap is trying to focus on STEM and, the next generation as they come and enter the workplace, and your own story with bio and CS, and now you're basically, making the world's internet work. So, how did you get there? What are your recommendations to today's kids of any age?
I'd say, for me, it was about just finding a passion area and focus and going from there. And I think, when I went into school, I was really focused on, hey, I want to do medical research, right? I was thinking I was going to do MD, PhD. And candidly, I ended up falling out of that a bit. And it was like, my junior year, I looked at myself in the mirror. I was like, do I really want to keep doing this? Or, what gets me excited? And I had taken a couple computer science classes, and I really enjoyed that. And I kind of made the pivot, honestly. And I ended up, finishing my degree with bio, but kind of limping across the finish line with that and really doing most of my coursework in computer science. So the first is, find the passion area that's in there. It's, especially when you're going into school, like, you don't know anything about anything yet, right? And you got to just think about it as, hey, how can I create a base to learn, how to like do structured learning and thinking, and be able to start glomming onto a subject area. So take a bunch of different classes in different areas. When you're in high school and you're applying for a university, the odds that you actually know where you're going to end up are probably pretty low, and you probably shouldn't, right? It's good to be able to meander around a bit. And then I would say, like, when I went to work and kind of entered the workforce, the thing that, like, I found as gave me energy was, one, it was always not just about doing my job and doing that well, but it was like, hey, how can I make an impact, and understanding everybody around me, right? It was like understanding, like, hey, well, what are the teams that I'm working with or for or to, and what do they need? How do they think about what the output is? And, that's how I ended up taking so many different roles across the career, whether that was kind of like in sales or on the technical side and like system administration, doing marketing, doing corporate strategy and finance. It's just like, well, I don't know, that stuff looks pretty interesting. Let me go just dive in and see how I can make an impact there. And so I would just encourage everybody, is like, hey, don't be scared about asking questions of your coworkers, right? And don't be scared about like having those conversations, and finding a culture that will celebrate that. I think I've been incredibly blessed and lucky being at Equinix now for as long as I have. It's, everyone's super generous with their time, and like the amount of like mentoring and sponsorship that people are willing to give is something that is very free, and we all pay that forward. And I would just say, ask of that the same from your own organization, right? Have those conversations, just reach out. And I think everybody wants to see people succeed in their company.
So we're starting to run out of time a little bit, and we do want to open it up. There's probably some live questions from the floor, and then maybe some online questions we'll check. But just maybe briefly, so we can get to Q&A, what do you see as being the next 5 to 10 years? Is it just more the same, more devices, more network buildouts, or is there some major disruption that is coming that, in technology or social behavior or whatever, that you think is going to cause the Equinix strategy to shift a little bit?
I've stopped trying to predict like the disruption timing, because I've been wrong consistently around that. And as you know well, timing matters incredibly on how these markets develop. I think what we are seeing, though, and will continue to probably accelerate over the years, is this idea of, how can I drive data to more places and get more utility and value out of it, right? And I think, you mentioned AI earlier. We're in the very, very early stages of understanding how to use AI in really meaningful ways across the organization. We're still kind of, I think, as a society and as a culture, it's like, first, let's figure out what to do with data, with like human processing, and how to kind of interpret that. And I think now we're going to get into the steps around like, okay, well, how do I really drive AI? And that AI workload is incredibly intense, and will probably end up driving incredible value. I watch that a ton on the side, that entire industry. It's like, the fact that you can see AI driven and created artwork now, right? AI driven and created music, like the creative elements of that is so cool to be able to see. And it's like, again, 5 years ago, we would never have predicted like that would be something that would come across, right? And like, you have award-winning kind of music compositions being done by AI. And I think, looking down the road, more of that's probably going to happen. So.
Yeah, not many people realize this, but I'm actually an artificial construct that is powered by Google. So it's Google Translate. We have, I think, someone on the floor that wants to ask a question. And while they're walking up to the stage, it looks like we have another question online about the impact of quantum. So we talked about AI edge and so forth. How does quantum add to the thing, or is it just basically, more compute and more data to feed it?
Yeah, I think it's more in different compute, right? I've been following the quantum space for a long time, and like, we're finally getting to kind of a usable quantum compute kind of infrastructure. That one also feels like we're still 5 to 10 years out from having that be like really commercially useful. The other area that you're probably seeing in the news a ton of interest and spend around is like fusion, right? And, people had stopped looking at kind of nuclear for a number of years, both from a regulatory perspective and the challenges there. But you're seeing a huge amount of investment there, and I think when you look at the goals that we need to have to prevent climate change, to actually like meaningfully impact our use of fossil fuels, it's not an either or, right? It's yes, we need wind, yes, we need solar, yes, we probably need more nuclear and figuring out how to like actually add that into the mix in clean ways. And so I'm excited to maybe see some of that. It's I think we're hopefully within the next 20 years or so, like the cusp of being able to get that. And that's again going to be a huge transformation for the world.
Okay, great. So looks like Buddy Reiser, you have a question? Or
hey, buddy.
Okay.
Hey, man. John,
man?
first of all, congratulations on your recent promotion. We're all so proud of everything you've accomplished. As you and I have discussed in the past, I'm very focused on digital equity. With all of the digital adoption that has been going on, and it's been accelerated by COVID, I have a concern that those that don't have access or can't afford broadband, or those that don't have the skills to use it, are going to get left behind. How can the industry take a leadership role in making sure that everyone has an opportunity to leverage this opportunity that we have with the internet?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, and that's obviously a huge focus area of the infrastructure bill, is like starting to really bridge that digital divide. And again, passion area for me, I think not having that access to broadband, not having that access to like remote learning and all of the tools and like just the learning capability that you have there it's just a meaningful disadvantage, right? And I think being able to, one, make sure like, apply for those things. If you're seeing broadband gaps in your area, like encourage that competition, encourage people to kind of tap into that funding, because, we need to hear about that need, and we need to go ahead then and create investment areas and vehicles for that. I think the second area is like, make sure that there's a healthy competition around that, right? Like everybody needs to make sure that, we've got good pricing structures, we've got good competition inside of all of that. It's, at Equinix, and we probably have over like, I think 1,500 carriers, and like watching those develop over the years is fascinating. And there was a period where it was just about consolidation, and it's great to see now kind of the reproliferation of, people wanting to invest in this space and being able to create business models for that. And then the last one I'd say is, as just an industry at large, it's about being really active in your local communities, right? Like finding opportunities to engage with high schools, with community colleges, like create those internship programs, create visibility into what technology can mean and drive in those local communities, because that's what we're going to count on, both in terms of for the future of our country, for the world, but also just for the future more selfishly for our own employment and workforce, right? We need to go ahead and have people aware of what's going on there.
Thanks, John. Thanks for everything you do in Loudoun County.
Absolutely. Thanks, buddy.
All right. Well, in the interest of sustainability and not using any more electricity than we need to for this video conference, I think we're probably at time. So any last closing thoughts?
No, it's been a great discussion. I mean, I would just say thank you for all of the work and kind of this session. It's been a lot of fun going back and forth. And I would just say, as a whole, like, ask it like infrastructure sexy again, right? I think it's and so everybody get involved in that.
Okay. Thank you for those words, and thank you for all your insights today.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, John and Joe, for that fascinating discussion. And thank you for attending today's event. NVTC's Data Center and Cloud Community of Interest has their annual Virginia Data Center State of the Union event on February 3rd. Loudoun County Economic Department's Executive Director, Buddy Reiser, will be leading the presentation. To register for this must-attend data center industry event, please go to nvtc.org. Thank you again for attending the event. I hope you will stay and network with your fellow attendees in the social lounge, and we look forward to seeing you at another NVTC event soon.